yeah, that's the whole theme of the album is as you know, all these movements are happening with Me Too movement, which is really important, and Black Lives Matter, really important, and definitely the Indigenous things with the residential schools. The fact that those things there's still so much further to go is amply evident in this neighborhood.
Hello and welcome to the Release Day Series podcast. I'm your host, Alex Huard. Joining me today is two-time Maple Blues Award songwriting recipient and two-time Edmonton Music Award recipient, Ann Vriend. On February 4th, 2022, Ann released her seventh album, Everybody Matters. With her personal motto of rock what you got, the construction of Everybody Matters is reflective of the communities Ann often advocates for. Inspired by their constant innovation and adaptability, empowered by making the most of what they have, and relying on creativity and imagination rather than ample materialistic availability. Ann's goal with the album is to pay homage to this and to celebrate empowerment. Not only has Ann's music seen consistent airplay in Canada, she's one of the only indie artists in recent history to break into the top 100 pop charts of commercial radio in Germany. Often invited to represent Canada at numerous diplomatic and economic events on behalf of the Canadian government, Ann has also played coveted stages such as South by Southwest and the Reeperbahn Festival. These international successes Ann has seen as an artist are absolutely incredible, but there should be no mistaking the impact she's had locally on her neighborhood of Macaulay in Edmonton, Alberta, and how she's used her music and the music of others to bring the people within her community closer. Broadcasting from the traditional territory of the First Peoples of the Williams Treaties First Nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, Inuit, and Métis peoples, this is my conversation with Ann Vriend. Thank you so much for joining me today, and congratulations on the release of Everybody Matters.
Thank you very much. And for people that have trouble with my name, you can just simplify it to AV. Stands for audio visual also. Well,
and you've got a really cool logo actually that makes it pretty easy to represent.
Trying really hard over here. Trying hard. Yeah. Here's a visual.
Got it. Awesome. Well, congratulations on the album release. This is an amazing album. I mean, I was thinking about it's near perfect, but I'm like, why near? I enjoy this album top to bottom. It is just so fun to get into. You see the keyboards behind you, and there's a lot of that on this, and just fantastic. Now you've released 6 other albums and 2 EPs. Can you speak to how the process and experience of creating those albums have helped you grow as an artist, leading to the creation of Everybody Matters?
Yeah, they sure have. You don't ever get it right the first time, I don't think. So, I've learned a lot through mistakes that I've made, and also just being in the studio with various producers and learning how different producers work, and just working on my own chops as a singer and as a piano player, and a writer. I did this interview about 2 years ago where the DJ played cuts from my first album in real time while I was sitting there.
How'd that go?
That was so hard to sit through. Yeah. There was a lot of wincing moments, because I would not do that now. What was I thinking? But it also, I was really young, and I worked with a producer where that was his first record too. And I also didn't hate it as much as I thought I would. I was like, wow, we're so naively just going for it.
Yeah. Well, and it feels like on that one too, on your first album, it feels very it feels pretty real, right? It does feel sort of it feels indie, but I feel like between that and then as you kind of go through some of your discography and get to this one, you definitely can feel that progression, just I think in terms of knowing even what you're doing in a studio. Yeah.
And we were I think when you're that young and it's your first album, you're super ambitious and you may cover everything in an album, all my thoughts I ever had and all my feelings and all the genres. And, I want you to know that I have all these skills and, just really not rein it in, you know?
Yes, because you're saying this, I'm like, yeah, you're right, because that's what I was noticing in going through your previous albums. Like, it's good music, but I felt like there was something about Everybody Matters, your new album, that is like, it's very whole. Like, it's very like, this is one album with songs and a sound that feels like you've kind of like not reached that, but you understood that, I guess, over like these 6 other albums, because there's kind of like a mishmash of genres and sounds, like you're saying there, throughout you know, quite a few of your first albums, but you've kind of found maybe how to kind of capture, like put a sound to who you are and fulfill it in a project like this.
Yeah, I think I really had to just, there's 2 things about that. One is, do people really think about albums anymore? Like in the single world of pop, or just even in general, like not as much. Yeah. So there's partly that. But then I thought, well, if I am going to bother making an album, like make an album, like take that parameter of work seriously, or just use it as a cohesive thing. And this album came out of me touring an album that was more produced and more in a sort of like studio production, less live instruments kind of, and more lush way. And I was touring with a limited indie budget. And so I just had me plus 2 other musicians on stage. And I decided to do kind of unusual combination of having the other 2 musicians be Hammond organ and backup vocals instead of your typical trio of like bass, drums, guitar, bass, drums, keys. And so people really liked it. I was touring in Germany for this like really big, like 8-week tour to support the single that was that was in the top 100 at the time. And so people were really loving the live show. And then at the merch table, they were asking me, do you have anything that sounds exactly like what we just heard? And I was like, no, I can't lie. Like, I'm not going to just make you buy this album and then go home and be like, that is not a trio of Hammond organ, voice, and piano. It's not. So that's to say that I basically just was like, hey, what if next time I came on tour, I had that album for these people who are exactly asking for it. So I applied for some funding for exactly that, and I didn't get it at first, and then I got it right before the pandemic. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to make this record in time for, going on tour again, because I had this really big tour booked in the spring of 2020. So I scrambled. I'd already started some aspects of the album without the funding, so at least I had most of it recorded, and except for drums and stuff. And then all of a sudden I got way more time to finish the record. Didn't have to have it in time for my tour. That wasn't happening. So so that's what happened with it. So really I finished this record in the summer of 2020, and I've been sitting on it ever since because of the pandemic, and just thinking, we kept having that carrot in front of our nose, it's just a couple of months, and then, so I kept just kicking the can down the road, thinking, I'll release it when it's at the pinnacle of the tour, because that's when I'll sell the most of it. And finally I just ran out of deadline with the funding agency, and they're like, you got to release this. You already got 2 extensions. So here I am.
Which I'm sure is not something that they were, strange to, with, considering
I can't be the only one asking.
So so the album, as you mentioned, it's I love to hear that, you did find that it's taken you that time to kind of build to this, because I feel like obviously the music world and how accessible music is and how accessible to creating it is, that, when you take a look and you actually see an evolution with you in your music and as an artist. And I just think it's really important for musicians to see that, and to know that you do have 6 other albums, 2 EPs to what you've been doing. That's, one, it shows that obviously this is what you love, and this is, what you've been doing and continue to do. But it also, it takes time, and it takes time to sort of build that and understand, what it is that, and who you are as an artist, and the sound that you can be really good at making. And I don't know if this is sort of going to be your direction forever. I mean, obviously you can do whatever you want, but you do know that you're really good at the R&B soul sound that has come from that everybody matters.
Well, thanks. I try, I mean, it helped that I had some really good musicians on the album with me, and that I had time to finish it, like more than I thought. Like I actually, as much as I don't want to be ever on the record for saying the pandemic was great,
right?
And it wasn't my fault, even if I said that.
Nope.
But just, I had more time to finish it, and there were some things about it that I wasn't super happy with, and I needed some time to figure out, like, well, why am I not, what is it about it, and how to fix it, and what's changed. And what I really did is actually I did a really indie crappy job of programming drums myself, using my keyword, like, the different putting on the drum patches. And that is not what stayed on the record, but I did. Okay. I was trying to describe it with words to several different drummers and programmers what I was after. And I realized the words were not working. And so I need to just do it, like show them like this, but better.
Enter Chris Burkett.
Yeah. Chris, no, actually, I mean, Chris and I did all the vocals and all of my keys in Toronto before the pandemic. And so he produced that part with me. He's a great engineer as well. So he really like recording the piano, the actual real piano that we did. We also did some vintage keys at Revolution Recorder in Toronto. And he's also really good at producing and recording vocals. So that was fun to work with somebody who's kind of picky on my level with them and sort of agreed with me on takes a lot. Like a lot of times I've had producers be like, that sounds great. And I'm like, well,
yeah,
it can be greater.
Him, eh?
Like they just want to get it done and out the door. And they're like, you're a good singer. This is good.
Right.
And I wanted to go way pickier than that. So.
Yeah, and I mean, for context, like Chris has worked with Sinead O'Connor and Buffy St. Marie, like just to name a couple, right?
Exactly.
And he goes back even further, I know, in the industry.
Well. He has a million stories like that. It's fun hanging out with that guy because he's a very, like, he has just so many stories where your jaw's just on the ground, like, what? You were there for that thing?
Yeah. Dexy's Midnight Runners when somebody got knocked out or something like that in the studio.
Oh, man. He's a guy that should write a book, or someone should write a book interviewing him because he's been around and met some crazy people, and he's just one of these guys that embraces adventures.
Oh, totally, eh?
He's not a stick in the mud. Like, he's willing to just like, okay, let's try that.
Yeah.
So, he's great.
So I met him and have been, lucky enough to have a couple conversations with him at Indie Week here in Toronto. Is that how you met? Like, did you meet him at a conference or something like that? How'd you get in touch with Chris?
Actually, I was working with a guy named Greg Nisbet, I think he met me through Julian Taylor, he's a really big fan of Julian Taylor's, and they're really good friends. And Julian and I, for a moment, were on the same label. And so somehow through all that, I met Greg, and I was telling Greg, and Greg put on a few shows for me to do some wineries around the GTA.
Cool.
And so while we're doing that, I was telling him how I had this idea for this acoustic sort of stripped down album. And he's like, oh man, I know a great producer if you're looking for one. And I was looking for one. And so he told me about Chris, and he's like, you should just meet with him. And then I met with Chris, and we had a coffee. And as we had a coffee, I got the email that I got the grant.
And then you go, okay.
I was like, I just want some money. And he was like, okay. So then we did a bunch of stuff. Yeah. Right before the pandemic.
Like, in that conversation, how did you determine that you wanted to work with him? Was it the resume, or, again, just the way he was as a, and being easy to talk to? Yeah,
a bit of both, like you got to be able to get along. But yeah, I liked him, and I thought that a lot of those older guys that you meet in the industry have a bit of a mansplaining problem.
Right.
That I used to think was the norm, and now I'm kind of over it. But he's not like that, and he's one of those people that's still excited about learning things, and like he's a young at heart kind of guy, I think. Yeah. And that I like that about him.
It's a good feeling, right? It's a good feeling to talk with him. And obviously that's important in building trust when going in with not only money, but your art, the work that you and your music. So
absolutely.
That's got to play a huge role. And you played a part, obviously, in producing. Is this the first time you've had sort of a producer role on your album?
No, it's not the first time. I produced an album of my own in 2012, which was a really different approach. Like, I took a band on the road for a few shows, and then I took them into the studio and did as much live off the floor as I could to try to get sort of the vibe of what it was like on stage as much as possible. I don't know if we achieved it, but
it sounds like a good, well, I mean, it sounds like an optimal sort of progression that you go, hey, let's go play live, and then let's just take that into the studio. And, you know, obviously the environment's different. There's a little bit more pressure, I'm sure, but, you know, it kind of seems like it's kind of a good, hey, let's play live and then just record it after.
Yeah, because oftentimes you record an album first and then you go tour it. And then while you're touring it, the songs develop more, or the arrangements develop more, and you really have time to sort of air them out and flesh them out and see what works with the crowd. And then it seems like that's when it should go in the studio. you know, you should just demo it and be like, okay, you know. And the other thing is that you have a vibe with the other people. You know, you've had some good laughs, and you've been in the band together, and you've, had some stories from the road, and then you have a different vibe in the studio that I think it's captured in the audio somehow than if you're just like, I've never met you. I'm a sessional player. Here's my part. You go, here's your part. And you just have this sort of cold thing that might have the great session players of the city on them, but it's a little clinical, you know? So
when you came into like wanting to produce this one, you kind of like got that experience out of your head, or was this again sort of a necessity thing that you needed to take on some producing just because of the time that you were working on it?
Well, I think what I learned in this is that there's a lot of times now people combine the role of producer and engineer because people have home studios, and it's not this big budget like it was in the heyday of recording studios with large labels where you have like a whole team of people on the recording end and a whole team of people on the marketing end. So what I realized is that like I'm not very interested in gear or recording and getting levels and different kinds of microphones and preamps, and like I'm not that person that could just talk your ear off about tech and gear. Okay. Like I have no patience for it. I'm not the person. But I do, as a songwriter and as somebody who's helped other people produce their music too, feel like I have skills as a producer. The fact that I feel like part of the role of being a producer is helping an artist figure out the quintessential thing it is about themselves that they want to put on that record, and make sure you stick to it and don't miss the forest for the trees and don't get lost in some tech thing or some technique thing, but that the audience will get a really strong feeling of the person and what they want to say. And if you don't know who you are and what you want to say, then it's really, you have to take a lot of time to find that out with that person as the role of the producer. And I also think, you know, in songwriting, getting into the songwriting and saying things like, do you really need that long of an intro? Or do you know, like actually chopping up this person's song in some cases, or lyrics, you know, that's getting into the songwriting of it. But I feel like that can sometimes be part of the role.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you could feel that, at least, you know, through this album, that I feel you were able to tap into that with yourself, at least, and being able to express, you know, how you wanted to express like the stories and the music and Everybody Matters. And I mean, so this album, you kind of said, is sort of 3 years in the making, or had been at least in the making, but I feel like a lot of the content, a little bit what you're singing out about is like a lifetime of you know, of writing, you know, with songs like Promises and Everybody Matters, and Mine All Mine. How did you come to write a collection of songs like these for people who are, you know, as you've said, disenfranchised and experiencing hardships?
Well, I mean, I've lived in this neighborhood it's now, by next month, it'll be 14 years. And that's like my attic that I'm in right now has windows on 3 sides. And it's on the 3rd floor of my house. And so I have quite a visceral vantage point to see a lot of things in the neighborhood that's very there's a lot of drug houses, and the opioid crisis has been and continues to be taking way more lives than COVID for sure. And, just a lot of shenanigans, like like when you hear sirens or when the police are arresting someone, it's like you don't even look out the window anymore. Like you would it's too distracting to constantly be looking out the window because you're always going to be like, what is going on over there? Oh.
Right.
So there's times when I've had to run out and, call 911 for overdoses or for other reasons, and times when I should have and I didn't. But definitely, especially during the pandemic, staying home and having more time to interact and hear stories that are really painful and people that get, really crappy cards dealt to them in life, and everyone's trying to do the best they can with what they got, and it's not all level playing field. Yeah, that's the whole theme of the album is as all these movements are happening with Me Too movement, which is really important, and Black Lives Matter really important, and definitely the Indigenous things with the residential schools, super important in this neighborhood. All of those things are very important in this neighborhood. They all are pointed, the fact that those things are still so much further to go is amply evident in this neighborhood. But while I saw all sorts of people in my circles rallying, to fight for those human rights, I still didn't connect with the people in this neighborhood at all. They're on another planet. And same with the pandemic. There's still people who, I feel like they don't even got the memo that there's a pandemic yet. It's just such a different world to be in, where the world of the street and survival is totally irrelevant of cancel culture or anything about these movements. And so I wrote the album kind of saying, if you really believe what you're saying, that everybody matters and that everyone's equal and there's justice and human rights, then you've got to, why is it that still for some people there's so more rights than others? Some people can afford a lawyer, some people can't.
Yeah.
So start there,
Yeah, definitely. And housing, housing's another big one with that as well. I don't understand. I really don't understand how people are homeless. How can we not do something, against that, to battle that, and especially, again, clean drinking water for, again, Indigenous communities.
Oh, it goes on and on, and it's all really about, colonialism, really. It's about greed.
100%.
If you justify greed in front of morality over and over again, then you'll never get anywhere. It's just it's that simple. There is enough water. There is enough land. There's enough money to buy everybody a house to live in with proper plumbing. There's enough to provide detox and effective rehabilitation programs for people with drug problems. There's enough money for all of the things, more than enough, but not when you have the 1% owning and operating 99% of the world's resources. Then there isn't. It's just that simple. And so, as much as I know that the average person out there listening to your podcast or in my circles either are not the 1%, I do think that we let them off the hook too easily. Because, the refugee crisis, there's homelessness here in my neighborhood and in Canada, but there's also, before the pandemic, there's 60 million refugees wandering the planet, which is way more than the population of Canada.
Yeah.
And that's also unnecessary. It is solvable, but it's not solvable if we keep perpetuating, we all want the lifestyles of the bases of the world. Then it's never going to happen.
Yeah. How did the community respond to your music and to this album? Have they heard it? Have they heard it
a lot for two reasons. One, my dude over here has been broadcasting it on his turntables pretty much daily or nightly for 2 years straight.
Amazing.
With various crazy remix ideas. And then to the whole neighborhood. Like, it's loud.
Wow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's really freaky because I'm like, I hear myself. Oh, yeah. Like, but it's always in some sped up or slowed down way, or it's like remixed with some weird stuff that I'm like, why is that recognized? Oh, it's me. That's why.
Yeah.
It's weird. I'll be gardening. I'm like, oh, that's me over there.
Yeah.
Anyways,
but
so
they've
there's
been like, there's that. Yeah.
And then there was the fact that we gave porch concerts every Sunday for the whole pandemic, like 26 of them in 2020 between April and October. And then a whole bunch in 2021. Like, basically, as long as the pandemic restrictions and the weather would allow, we had a concert every Sunday on a front porch. It was free for anybody in the neighborhood, and lots of people from outside of the neighborhood came as a destination for the concerts. And it was me and my friends, and eventually a lot of other bands. So, and we had a sound like technician. So eventually it was like sometimes like 5 bands on the bill on one Sunday.
Yeah,
like a mini festival. It was super fun, and we played a lot of songs from the album, and I formed a little group out of it actually that has now called Avian Inner City.
Oh, amazing! And
it's me plus 5 or 6 singers singing like almost like a mini choir to my sort of soul songs.
Yeah, that's so cool. So well received, I guess, by, through these performances and through the playing of the song. Yeah, that's awesome.
I gotta say, like, despite the criminality and the gangs and the violence around here, there was never one moment per concert that anything violent or harmful or happened. People in the neighborhood were super proud of it, like, because they helped out with it too, like bringing chairs, setting them up, and setting up markers for physical distancing, but also just and there's a guy down the road, he would always like rake the leaves. And a really big takeaway from it all was how much I realized that people want to give, and music too. Like, lots of guests were from the neighborhood that sang and played instruments and stuff. And I don't know, somehow the way everything's been monetized in our society is that you think if someone's down and out, you should pay for something to give a handout to them, like a material thing.
Right.
And then you also think that they have nothing to give because they don't have material things, so they must have nothing. It's very devaluating on both ends of humanity, because all people want to do is just like, what's your name? Have a conversation and give what you can. And people have lots to give, and they really went all out to give it. And so I have to say, like, I have a totally different relationship with my neighborhood now that the pandemic has happened and we put on those concerts. And
I gotta see your Everybody Matters music video too. Really, it shows a great and loving community of visuals in that as well. So
yeah, that was fun. Our neighbors are very tolerant, I have to say. It's a very tolerant neighborhood. I really have to say that. And, with all that's going on in Canadian politics right now, I have to say that our neighborhood really honestly could teach like our country a few things, because it's a very tolerant neighborhood. You can't live here and not be tolerant.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, it's, again, amazing album. You can find the link to that and to your website, your videos in our show notes. So Ann, AV, thank you so much for joining me on the Release Day Series podcast.
Thank you.
You can discover more podcast episodes as well as our limited video series on our website, www.releasedayseries.com. And if you'd like to support the show, we've added that option to the website as well. Send us $1, $3, $5, whatever you'd like. Any support helps. But most importantly, we appreciate you listening and sharing the podcast.